Good afternoon. My name is Delia Valles Rosales, and I'm currently at the Texas A&M University in Kingsville, and I am one of the members of the National Science Foundation HSI STEM Resource Hub, and I co-host this webinar series along with Dr. Martha Desmond. I would like to welcome you to another spring webinar focused on celebrating and learning from successful NSF HSI awardees. And today's topic is promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion in the classroom and beyond. A little bit of housekeeping before we start this webinar. This webinar will last 1 hour, and today's webinar we have 2 speakers, and we anticipate like 15 to 20 minutes for questions at the end of the presentations. All questions related to that topic will be written via the box that is called Q&A box. And if somebody has a question, technical question related to Zoom or other questions, please use the chat room. We are going to be posting in there some information for participants to check, and we will be welcome your questions. Dr. Martha Desmond and I will be curating your questions at the end of the presentations. If we don't have enough time to answer all of the questions, we will definitely post the answers later in our portal. You are more than welcome to check our portal because these sessions are actually recorded. All of the recordings are posted on the portal. You are also invited and welcome to join our hub, and you can become a member through our website, and we will be posting the website in the chat room. Another thing is that we really would like you to answer a survey, and it doesn't take more than 5 minutes to do that. And the link to the survey will be actually posted on the chat room as well. This survey is extremely important for us because we are not only getting a feedback from you, but we will also using this data to report it to the NSF as a measure of our program outcomes. It is my great pleasure to introduce our speakers this afternoon. And one of the speakers, the first speaker is Dr. Matthew Cover, and he is a professor of ecology at the University of California State University, STANISLAUS. He has spent his entire life in Northern California, and the people and landscapes of this region have influenced his academic and professional work. He studied hydrology, geomorphology, and soil sciences as an undergrad at the UC Berkeley. He got involved in watershed monitoring while working with great colleagues at the San Francisco Bay Regional Water Quality Control Board. Got very interested in stream ecology and went back to UC Berkeley for graduate school to pursue a PhD in environmental science, policy, and management. His doctoral research described the influence of landslides and debris flows on riparian vegetation, stream food webs, and salmonid habitat in the Klamath Mountains. He's incredibly grateful to work as an educator at Stan State in California's San Joaquin Valley with a wonderful students and colleagues. Our second speaker is Dr. Alex Raselis, and he is a professor of agroecology at the University of Texas at Rio Grande Valley. Studying ecological interactions in the social, political, and economic context in which they occur, Dr. Raselis is a professor in the Department of Biology and in the School of Earth, Environmental, and Marine Sciences at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley. He joined UT-RGV from its legacy institution, UT Pan American, in 2013. Before that, he was a research ecologist with the USDA Agricultural Research Service. In response to the challenges of balancing agricultural and urban development in the lower Rio Grande Valley, Dr. Raselis has established a nationally recognized research and student training program at UT-RGV in agroecology and the study of urban ecosystems with the ultimate goals of using science-based approaches to elucidate the patterns of how landowner decision-making connect to environmental and social health, and increasing the ecological literacy in local area students through transformative education and engaged scholarship. Social capital, and with a community engagement and outreach to facilitate sustainability, ecology, and resiliency within our communities. It is our great pleasure to have these two great speakers this afternoon and welcome you and thank you for sharing your experience with us. Please go ahead.
Thanks so much, Delia. Thank you, Martha. Thank you to the whole HSI STEM Hub team. It's great to be here. It's great to be presenting with Alex Rosellis, who I admire very much. I wonder if we could just start out, if folks who are joining us, if you'd be willing to share in the chat, if we have the chat working, where you're joining us from, just to get some sense of who's here and what your local contexts are. And while you're doing that, if that's working, I will get my slides up.
The chat should be working just fine.
Great.
Some people responded already.
Hi, Harold. Hello, Locke. Some names I recognize here.
You know some of them.
Harold's played a essential part of this work that I'm going to be talking about here today. In fact, I borrowed some of his slides. Well, thanks very much for sharing in the chat. Yeah, keep those coming in. This is great to see. Oh, Forest Service, wonderful. Folks from all over the country and the world. So yeah, my name is Matt Cover. I'm a professor at Cal State Stanislaus. I'll show in a minute, talk a little bit about my local context. But I like to start a lot of presentations this way when there's a big audience, people from many places. And I really like this concept that Eve Tuck writes about, which is, if we just stop for a minute and imagine all of these places that you're joining us from. You know, Alex is in the Rio Grande Valley in Texas. I'm in California, and all of you are everywhere. And these oftentimes feel like they can be, where you can be a great distance from each other, right? Both geographically, perhaps, as well as our educational contexts and the work we do might feel like they're very different, very context dependent. Eve Tuck writes about this idea of the rising sign of social justice in education. And I think if you're joining us here, you probably have commitment to this idea of social justice in education. And she writes about, you know, the fact that if we can imagine this constellation high up in the sky that reflects this idea of social justice, which has lots of different meanings in different places. And coming together in this moment, you know, we may be geographically separated, we may be separated in terms of our ideas and thinking around education. But for these few minutes, perhaps we can imagine each of us looking up and these angles that are made from each of our points, looking high up into the sky, this constellation. When we think about how small that angle is, it actually suggests that we're much closer than we might think. And so she uses this idea of incommensurability, which just is kind of this, it allows for this fact that we may have different goals, we may be doing different things in our work, but it's possible for us to come together and learn from each other, even if ultimately we end up going in different directions. So I think this is a really just nice way to think about this coming together that we're doing right here. Okay, so yeah, I'm coming to you from Cal State University Stanislaus, which is in the San Joaquin Valley of California. It's one of the smaller of the 23 campuses in the CSU system, which is the largest four-year undergraduate system in the United States. We serve a diverse student body. Over 3/4 of our students are first-gen college students, and over half are Latinx. And so this informs, and our local context informs a lot of the work and a lot of the ways we approach education. This is a map from a really cool website the state of California has put together called CalEnviroscreen, which is just this amalgamation of 13 different indicators of environmental pollution, things like air quality, like ozone, as well as drinking water contaminants and pesticide use. And it also brings in population characteristics, for example, health characteristics, rates of asthma and cardiovascular disease, as well as socioeconomic indicators, such as poverty and housing burden and education. And I just wanted to show this just because California is an incredibly diverse place. And when we're thinking about, oftentimes think of California as being this, this leader and this success in so many areas, which is true. And there's parts of California that haven't seen the same levels of investment and same levels of resources, and in fact have tremendous environmental burdens, climate change burdens, health disparities. And so the Central Valley of California, especially the San Joaquin Valley, is one of these regions that these orange and red colors suggest these are environmental justice communities. And so this is just to give one example of the context that I'm working in. So today in this talk, I know it's a brief talk, and we're talking about our HSI projects and our stories of success. And so I'm going to try to encapsulate that in the next 10 minutes. And I'm going to run through a few slides. But I just wanted to begin by talking about the problems that we're trying to address, and then the approach that we've taken, and just a few examples of the success stories. So at the biggest picture level, right, maybe thinking about this constellation of social justice education, to me, the problems that we're trying to address are systemic ones. And I think the big picture is that our institutions of higher education were not designed to serve many of the students who are now in our systems. They were designed essentially for privileged white men over the past century and longer. And that's one big issue when it comes down to the culture of higher education and the structure and the way it's organized. And I think the second big issue, and I'm trying to avoid a deficit mindset, but I think the way, if we think systemically and structurally, I think we can all recognize that the way that faculty, such as myself and maybe many of us in the room, the way that we're trained, the way that we're hired, the system didn't really afford us all of the resources and training that we would ideally receive in order to help us really understand our students and meet our students and work with our students. To me, those are the big picture issues that we're thinking about here. And we have I want to just share some local, I think, examples on my campus and in our STEM programs that reflect that. We've done surveys to better understand who our students are, and in fact, Harold Stanislaus, who's joining us here today, has produced a lot of this data. So I want to acknowledge Harold's work here. Why do students leave STEM programs at our campus? We've seen that it's really a sense of belonging is a huge issue. And so we think a lot about belonging and think a lot about what are our teaching practices that might start to engender a better sense of belonging. Historically, we've seen really high rates of non-pass grades in a lot of STEM introductory courses. And that became kind of the focus of our grant, is thinking about these introductory courses and how we can work with faculty to try to improve academic success in those courses and improve a sense of belonging. And then in surveys of faculty, we've seen pretty inconsistent adoption of a lot of practices that we know are evidence-based and that lead to, in a lot of cases, good educational outcomes. So that's some of the context for our project. I think I'd like to just spend one other minute talking about, before I get into what we've done in our project, I want to take a minute and talk about some theories of change. Some of these we had in mind when we designed the project, and others I think have come about over the course of the project. But I wanted to start with this idea, and a nice resource is D. Fink and their work on significant learning experiences. But it's the idea that, you know, content knowledge in our disciplines is just one aspect of what we hope students will learn. And so this diagram on the left shows that significant learning involves actually many things. It involves application of knowledge and integration, and that there's, you know, metacognition that should be happening, and there's caring, both learners and educators caring about each other, as well as caring about the knowledge that's being learned and how it's applied. And there's these human dimensions. And so D. Fink talks a lot about that. You know, we have in general these ideas about curriculum and pedagogy, and we can think about how we teach, but there's also these situational factors, right? There's this context dependent. Some of the things that I mentioned about my campus and about my region, these influence how we go about trying to design significant learning experiences. And so that suggests that faculty need to spend time learning about our students, understanding our region, understanding themselves. And that really brings in, this is some newer work that wasn't around when we were designing this program, but I'm really a big fan of Brian Dewsbury's work. He has written a paper about deep teaching. He also offers a faculty, a week-long faculty retreat, which I haven't done, but I want to do, highly recommend, based on Brian's work. But the idea of deep teaching is that before we can really think about appropriate pedagogies and designing curriculum, we need to step back, and as faculty, we need to understand ourselves. We need to have developed self-awareness of who we are, what we bring as educators, how our own backgrounds and experiences have shaped how we think about teaching and learning. And that's really a place to start. And then we need to think about developing empathy for our students and understanding who they are, understanding their experiences and their backgrounds, what they want out of education. And it's only once we really spend this time looking inwardly and outwardly at our students, then we move on to trying to bring our values into our teaching. And a third, I'm such a huge fan of Laura Rendon's work. And her book, Senti Pensante Pedagogy, which really asks us to think much more holistically about education. It's not just being about the brain, but being about the body and the mind and the heart. And the other thing that Dr. Rendon does in this book is she has us think about these dominant paradigms of education, of higher education, and the way that they might limit how we think about education. So we need to challenge ideas like separating areas of knowledge, separating ourselves from our learning. We need to challenge ideas of competition. We need to challenge the privileging of just intellectual and rational knowing. We also need to recognize that there's emotional learning and spiritual knowledge. So these are some of, personally, some of the ideas that I'm kind of using as a basis for thinking about how we go about changing the teaching and learning in our classes. Okay, so our project is called Ciencia, and it's a kind of silly acronym, but the Collaboration for Inclusive and Engaging Curriculum, Instruction, and Achievement. So this project was funded through a 2018 NSF, autocorrect, it keeps changing it to HSI award, one of the critical transitions grants. And so our overall goal in this project is to transform the culture of teaching and learning through a faculty-driven professional development program. We're focused on gateway courses. And we really want faculty to be thinking about and working with evidence-based practices and culturally relevant practices. Those are our kind of two cornerstones. Okay, I'll just, rather than like showing a whole lot of slides, I'm just going to briefly talk through what this program is about. It's going back to our theories of change. We recognize that change begins with the faculty looking into themselves and understanding themselves. And so I think a key idea is that this sort of work is not, you can't do it in a workshop, in a one-off event. It really requires a sustained effort, and it really requires building a community of faculty who are trying to go through this process. And so we used a cohort-based model. We worked with a group of faculty. The number varied from as many as 20 to as low as 8 over the course of a 1-year long faculty learning community. And one of our goals, was really to bring people together and to establish conversations and dialogue across departments, across programs, in a lot of cases in ways that we felt like hadn't been supported in the past at our institution. So this year-long program, it begins with a summer institute, and this is, depending on the year and the format, a 3 to 5 day intensive, almost a retreat of sorts. Although oftentimes, given the pandemic, this was on Zoom. But we really felt like we needed to start with this sustained period of time, give faculty the time to really reflect and think about their teaching practices, and that requires more than just these short workshops. And then throughout the academic year, we have faculty working together in a few different ways. We experimented with a few different things. We had what we called teaching squares, which was groups of 4 faculty who met regularly, who visited each other's classes, and then had meetings to really talk through what's working, what's going on in the classes, and to give each other feedback. And this is, I think, a really kind of exciting practice because it's moving away from like a class observation that's more punitive or more involved in hiring and retention practices, and it's moving more towards getting authentic feedback from our peers about our teaching in kind of a non-threatening way. We also experimented with what we called curriculum collaboration teams, which was faculty who teach either the same class or similar classes, and they work together in the process of kind of redesigning their classes and integrating their classes. And so that carries on throughout the academic year. And then there's kind of a concluding event where faculty have a chance to share out their work and reflect on their progress. And so we went through this process 3 times, 3 cohorts of faculty. By the end, we were able to reach a majority of faculty who teach gateway courses in STEM fields on our campus. So a majority of the faculty who regularly teach those courses have gone through this year-long process. And we're currently, in the process of trying to step back and make sense of the outcomes. Of course, there have been lots of complications along the way with pandemic, changes in modality, all the associated upheaval. And so in some ways, we're beginning to think more about, some qualitative outcomes and trying to better understand the faculty experience and how this program has supported faculty during these challenging times. And that was definitely a theme. Like faculty often mentioned how valuable it was just to have people they were regularly talking with about their teaching. All right, I'm going to finish up with just a few more slides, and I want to emphasize, I guess, that there've been an amazing number of positive outcomes from our program. Just hearing from faculty, there's some really impressive testimonials from faculty about how they've begun thinking about their own privilege and power and oppression in the classroom, which gets it right at like what the goals of this program were. But I want to I guess end before I hand it back to Alex to hear about his work, his amazing work. I want to end with what I see as still these kind of unanswered questions. And I'm going to draw upon Laura Rendon's work, Senti Pensante. And I'm thinking about these as privileged agreements in STEM. And so what I mean by that is, even when we're talking about changing curriculum and pedagogy for the better, and even when we're talking about doing important work in diversity, equity, inclusion, social justice, and education, sometimes those approaches don't always allow us to peel back all the layers of that onion, right? That is STEM education and higher education. And there are these kind of assumptions that I think a lot of us bring to our work as a result of our training, as a result of our work in STEM fields, that can be really hard to, not even to unlearn, but really hard to even reflect on. And I think we bring them, we've learned them as scientists, and we bring them into our teaching. And so in particular, I'll just mention a culture of positivism. And I'm going to cite the work of Henry Giroux, who's a critical education scholar, critical pedagogy scholar. And kind of at the heart of positivism is the idea of objectivism. And I want to like make sure that I'm distinguishing between approaches we bring to our science, like objectivity is a really important core concept in science. But when we're doing education and we're dealing with people, I think as STEM folks, as scientists, we tend to bring that analytical side of our brain that privileges quantitative data, and it does, as Laura Rendon writes about, it does separate kind of the analytical and rational side and the content we're learning from social factors. And so I like this quote from Henry Giroux: knowledge becomes not only countable and measurable, it also becomes impersonal. Teaching in this paradigm is discipline-based, and it treats subject matter in a compartmentalized and atomized fashion. And so this idea, I think, for me, kept coming up over and over again as we're working with faculty. And we saw this come out, especially during the pandemic, when faculty were faced with these incredible challenges. I recognize for myself, it was such a challenging time to try to continue teaching with all of this upheaval and the move to online. But we saw over and over again, even faculty who were committed to DEI, committed to really thinking about their pedagogy, there was, when confronted with challenges, immediately the concerns that came up. How do we maintain standards? How do we maintain continuity? How do we replicate the in-person teaching experience online? How do we continue to assess in a fair way, which codes for a way that's rigorous and that ensures it's primarily concerned with preventing cheating, and these concerns about assessment that tend to take over our thinking about teaching. So it becomes more about assessment than it is even about learning. So I guess I wanted to end with this idea that I still feel like there's a lot for us who are thinking about social justice, STEM education to be thinking deeply about, a lot of which I think is baked into our disciplines. So with that, I'm really curious to hear from Alex and his work, and I just wanted to acknowledge everyone who was on the Ciencia team. This was a big team effort. And Harold, I don't have your photo on this slide, and I apologize, but Harold is our evaluator. And it's been great working with the full team on this project. So thanks very much for listening.
Thank you. Dr. Racelis, are you ready?
Yes.
Great, thank you.
Let me go ahead and share my screen. Are you seeing my screen here?
Not yet.
1 second.
Mhm.
It is. Well,
Okay.
good afternoon, everyone. And it's a pleasure hearing your presentation, Matthew. Dr. Cover and I, and just so that you guys know, we went back and forth a little bit over the week, the last couple of weeks, to talk about how we can really align our presentations in a way that kind of delivers the message, in a very coordinated way. And so he told his story about his experiences in his project. And, actually, Dr. Cover, this is the first time I've actually heard the entire presentation. I was actually quite fascinated. I would love to visit with you more. Our programs are very similar. And so a lot of the information that I'm going to share with you today is quite similar in its foundation with what you just heard. Just a little bit about myself. I actually teach different courses around ecology, agricultural ecology, sustainable agriculture. And in my work, I do all of my work in the lower Rio Grande Valley. So if you ever visited Texas, it's as far south as you can go. It's an extremely hot, arid area, very unique in the sense that we are subtropical. We're one of the few areas in the country that grow oranges, for example. I know California and Florida, you're there as well, Puerto Rico to some extent. But it's also a very unique region in the sense that it has some of the highest concentration of Hispanic farmers in the country, actually the highest concentration of Hispanic farmers anywhere outside of Puerto Rico. And so our student body reflects that. We have about a 91% Hispanic student body. So we have a very unique opportunity to understand the role of Hispanic serving institutions and what that means. How do you serve your communities in a way through the largesse of a public institution? And I've been in this public institution since 2013. Some of you guys I saw on the call, I know some of you guys, and you guys know I also come from a very large immigrant family. You can see my picture of my family here in the bottom left-hand corner. And I'm the father of 2 kids who were born and raised in the Rio Grande Valley. So even though I'm not from there myself, I definitely have a very important connection to the area, as my kids are indeed from that region. So here's some of the pictures of my day, my typical day. Yesterday I was out in the field. It was 100 degrees. And it's a very fascinating place to work, and I welcome anyone to come visit. I want to kind of just back up a little bit and talk about my work in the context of what we're all experiencing. Some of you guys might know that I serve on the Federal Equity Commission, the subcommittee on agriculture. And in my work there, I mean, it's very clear that there is a lot of disparities in our country, not just in the students we serve, but even in the institutions. So Dr. Cover and I, we come from an institution that's not considered, for example, a land grant institution, not considered a high resource institution. Interestingly, in the wake of COVID-19, a lot of HSIs, including UTRGV, saw enrollments go up. It was one of the weird, interesting times where if you look at the list of Hispanic serving institutions across the state, the actual total number went down, because there were a lot of institutions that were right around that 25% level that those students, especially the Hispanic students, they moved back home and they enrolled in institutions like mine, like UTRGV, like I imagine Cal State STANISLAUS. And so, we play a very important role in serving a certain community. And unfortunately, a lot of these same institutions are often underinvested and they're under-equipped. But we do have a lot of wealth when it comes to the communities we serve, and in particular the cultural wealth of the region. So that's one context. The other is, of course, about this concept of DEI. What is it? You know, you guys probably have seen the news. There is a lot of language around DEI that's become inflammatory, not just here in the state of Texas, but in other states. We're trying to figure out and how best respond in a way that allows us to serve our regions, our constituents, but also, you know, comply with some of the regulations and that are coming down from state governments in particular. You know, of course, DEI is one of those interesting things. Everyone knows every position you see out there, you make people write a DEI statement, you know, how they address issues around DEI. And I think there needs to be another conversation about what that really means. And in particular, what it means at Hispanic serving institutions. So let me just give you kind of, some of you guys have heard me talk about some of this, about what is a Hispanic serving institution. So, you know, if you go back to 1965, during that era of the Great Reform, where there was a lot of very historic legislation around civil rights. You know, there was the Higher Education Act of 1965, where it identified things like historically Black colleges and universities. Now, there are already a set of HBCUs out there, especially since around 1890, they created a distinction of HBCUs. There was about 19 of them, but in 1965, they recognized that there were other historically Black colleges and universities, so they gave them an official designation, as well as tribal colleges. Tribal colleges also got official designation. And since then, there has been a lot of negotiation, discussion around the growing number of universities that were serving a growing number of students, Hispanic students. And so after some negotiation and deliberation, there was a modification to the 1965 Higher Education Act. This was done in 1995, that created this distinction of a Hispanic serving institution. Now, the definition of an HSI was a lot different than the definition of the other institutions I just mentioned. This was more of a demographic distinction, where 25% of the student body had to identify Hispanic for you to qualify for this distinction. And you know, I mean, that is a kind of a distinction on itself, you know, as opposed to HBCUs and tribal colleges that had a different definition. Other minority serving institutions like Asian American Pacific Islander serving institutions, they follow the same distinction. And in fact, it is because of that distinction that we did see a drop in the total number of HSIs after the pandemic, because for institutions that were hovering around 25%, you know, they lost a couple of hundred, 1,000 students, and that dropped them under the threshold, and it dropped them outside of that distinction. It's interesting to say this, I mean, to mention this, because institutions across the country are vying for this distinction, because with this distinction comes a lot of resources from the federal government. It qualifies them for certain, you know, so for example, it qualifies our institutions to receive a grant from the National Science Foundation for HSIs, right? And so you've got universities across the country really kind of aiming for this. Now, so let me fast forward a little bit. In 2020, there was a study done by Michigan State, or HAKU actually, where they looked at, you know, HSIs, and really like they still found that there was a lot of disparities even with this distinction, right? So HSIs receive federal funding at a significantly lower rate compared to regular institutions, or what they call non-MSIs, or sometimes called predominantly white institutions. You know, the specific set of students also kind of fit a certain profile. First generation students, lots of first of family students, and a lot of them coming from low income homes. So as I mentioned to you, there's about 540 institutions across the country that some researchers call de facto HSIs, because ultimately they have the distinction, but what do they do in their classrooms? What do they do in terms of the research and service that actually serve Hispanic students or serve the demographics that they are, supposed to serve according to the distinction? That is a discussion that's ongoing. People write about this a lot. Maritza de la Trinidad wrote a paper in 2019, really kind of exploring this. A lot of the information I'm sharing with you now, she's detailed in her paper. And I think a lot of the discussion has evolved into like, well, what does it really mean to be Hispanic serving? In the same way that when you go to Hispanic, historically Black college and university, they have a different mission, and they have a different environment. And so, a lot of the things here around HSIs, as Dr. Cover mentioned, there's this predominant persistent deficit narrative. We talk about our students, a lot of our faculty talk about our students as high risk, as underprepared, high maintenance students, low income. You see this quite often, where, we had even a former provost here at UTRGV made a comment in public, talked about students, and in particular one student, and he made the question, well, how many grandparents do these kids have? They're always at a funeral or something, and they really kind of talk about the culture and the identity of students in a very deficit mindset. And so, there's a lot written about this. Matthew, you mentioned some of these scholars who've written about this. But really, that kind of deficit narrative is the probably the biggest barrier when thinking about our students and thinking about equity and inclusion among our students. So this really signals a need to switch to more of an assets-based narrative, how we can focus on equity, we can focus on diversity and cultural wealth in the classroom. And so how do we do that? How do we do that in STEM? Well, so we write about this in our proposal. First is to dismantle that deficit thinking, and then focus on ways to generate intrinsic motivation in the classroom. And there's a lot of written about how deficit thinking and this deficit mindset disproportionately impacts minority students. And how do we try to dismantle that in our students? Some of which, one strategy is to promote cultural competence, to support ways for students to maintain their cultural integrity, like the work of Gloria Ladson-Billings in her work around cultural relevant pedagogy. But some of it is just to create critical consciousness among our students so that they become aware of the kind of larger social cultural issues that have actually led to injustices in the classroom and these common dominant ideologies in the classroom. And this is exactly what Dr. Cover was talking about, that historic idea of academic freedom and critical thinking. Even the structure of the academy is based on a model created 150 years ago by a certain set of thinkers, and that framework probably should be challenged, and it should be challenged starting in the classroom. So we use this kind of framework in our work with our NSF HSI program, with this very simple theory of change. We knew that the biggest part of our academic budget is in faculty salary. So in order to do this, you would have to really change the mindset of faculty, and to do it in a way where if we wanted to see innovations inside the classroom or strategies to change inside the classroom, you needed to start with the faculty. And as part of our program, we also expanded the research we've done on it. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that looked like. So here's those things that I mentioned to you, right? I mean, these 4 tenets are what we really focused on in our faculty workshops. And very similar to the Scienza program at Cal State STANISLAUS, we really focused on our faculty on an intensive set of workshops. But one of the key features here is in partnership with some other community partners, we brought our faculty on a tour of our region. And in the bottom left-hand corner, you see a QR code. In that one time where we couldn't assemble our faculty, we actually created an online version, an online story map. So you guys can shine your camera on that and you can bring on that online story map. You guys can kind of look through it. We kind of created videos and interviews that simulated a tour of our region. You can see some of the destinations we came up with here. We brought students to government organizations. I mean, we brought our faculty to government organizations. We brought our, to federal organizations. We brought some of our community partners onto campus to visit with our faculty. We brought our faculty to see things like the border wall, to see agricultural facilities. Probably the most impactful is when we brought them to meet students and their families where they live, right? So you can see up here, these visits to community centers, visits to colonias here in our region. And we had our faculty sit with parents, with community members, and with students talking about issues in their homes or in their own communities. That had a huge impact on the mindset of our faculty, and really got them to understand what it should mean being a faculty member at UTRGV in particular. So like here's one picture of faculty just sitting and going around this talking circle where they're just talking to community members. And we try our very best, where there's language issues, we place people around to help, translate and hear what faculty will have the faculty just listen. We ask a question and community members, something like they'll say, what is it that you want your students, your kids to get from faculty members at UTRGV? Or we might ask the faculty, why don't you explain to community members what a typical university student day looks like? Because sometimes faculty will say, I don't understand, my kid, they'll go to class and they only have school from like 9 to 10. And then that's it. Like, why aren't they in school longer? So things like that, we have them dialogue. And often what happens here is there's a lot of tears, actually, because faculty, they get so moved by the stories of the community partners and their kids, and they realize that, sometimes they're not that much different. We as parents want the best for our kids. And the question is how can we as faculty give that to their kids? And that's what the conversation is about. We bring them to these places, and so here's one of those testimonies that Dr. Cover mentioned that he has as well in his program. Here's somebody that wrote, after visiting this center, the two employees, I'll read it out loud. The two employees to greet me spoke Spanish, and we had to work together to communicate the layout of the center and the check-in process. So given that experience and the values captured in this picture, this image represents to me the competing priorities, voices, and values in the valley, the Rio Grande Valley. Much of the ecotourism and development of the Rio Grande Valley has been dedicated in a way to white people from outside of the area, even though the local community is the steward of the biological heritage. So we captured all of this. We as part of our project, we had them write in journals. We had them, as part of our work, we had them rewrite some of their curricula. We also had them rewrite their teaching statement. So we collected their teaching statement before they came in, and we had them rewrite it as part of the workshop. And then we watched them and we helped guide them and advise them on how the best way that they can use that information and motivation into innovating their courses, right? So I'll give you an example. You had a faculty member that taught statistics, and he thought it would be a good idea to have students collect data from people protesting certain things, like the border wall, for example. So they designed surveys and collected data, and seeing what that impact had on student learning and sense of belonging. So here's some pictures. I myself taught a course where we had students who are learning about forestry techniques. apply some of those forestry techniques as we did surveys of trees in the community. So in here, this QR code you see on the bottom right, actually you can have access to a lot of the curricula of these faculty. We post them online on our website. Feel free to log on and check it out. Let's see. So the courses that were redesigned really were then centered on what we call locally relevant issues, right? That really just speak directly to our learners. So for example, in my community forestry class, we had students think about how to design landscapes that could protect homes from extreme weather in the Rio Grande Valley, or that could provide them with some fruits or other source of sustenance that they request, right? So this came from a conversation with community members that were like, hey, look, here are our biggest challenges. You know, sometimes it's hard to concentrate because it's too hot in our house and we don't have reliable AC. Or sometimes it's like, look, we just, we got other issues like food insecurity. Some of these things that kind of inspired me to think about, well, how can we use that motivation to kind of enhance the intrinsic motivation of our students to learn. Really a lot of these classes that focus on product-based approaches that leverages our community wealth, and the students can help tackle some of the problems with competence, with autonomy and relatedness. So these are some of the things that we try to help our faculty develop. Some of the courses are community engaged. Some of the courses actually are more focused on linguistic-centered pedagogy, and others that are focused on family-centered pedagogy. So, some of our findings, this is our 5th year of the project. This is the last year, actually, and I'm actually quite relieved that it's almost over. But we have documented through some of the entrance and exit materials that the participation in the workshops have had a really significant impact on the way that the faculty think about our students, and then that in turn influence the way that they teach the content and deliver it, right? So here's a QR code here of a paper that just got published by our team around the impact of the workshops on our faculty. We're still working on a couple more. We also found with one of our faculty who offered a bilingual course. The course was Gateway Biology, Biology 1 and 2. She offered them in a bilingual modality where students could answer and ask questions in either English or Spanish. She found that kind of pedagogy had tremendous impact on the student aptitude in terms of the performance on certain, on certain test questions that we looked at. She did both an English only section and a bilingual section, and we compared them over 3 years. And we found out that so not only did it improve their scores by about 1 letter grade, but it also dramatically increased their sense of belonging in those courses. So this is a paper that you can get on the QR code right here on the side. We also kind of trying to synthesize some data that we have on family-centered pedagogy, where we had faculty members in chemistry teach courses, especially during the pandemic, where they asked their parents and grandparents some help on thinking about difficult concepts around density. For anyone who's made a tortilla, apparently there's a very critical stage of figuring out whether your masa is ready by floating a piece of the masa dough in water. And our faculty use that to teach very difficult concepts around density, which was really, really eye-opening. We also are working on a set of data that demonstrate how community engaged courses also have an impact on the student's sense of belonging and in their worldview. So these are some of the products that we have coming out. We're trying to summarize it before the grant ends, but I'm happy to share with anyone some of that information and data. So with that, I kind of want to just tell you guys a little bit that it's been a real challenge to do this work, even at UT Rio Grande Valley, where we have it in our DNA. One of the things that I will admit is that when we submitted this grant, I was in a leadership position as an associate dean. in the College of Sciences. It gave me a little bit of latitude and authority, responsibility and authority to do this kind of work. I wouldn't say that it's not become a priority, but we have a new dean now who have a different set of priorities. And so I am administering this outside of the College of Sciences. So I still have the responsibility, but unfortunately, I do not have the authority to push our faculty in this direction. I will say, however, that every single faculty that participated in development workshops have had the same response as the faculty in Dr. Cover's program. It has made a tremendous impact on our faculty. I think, you know, they always say every new faculty should have this as part of their new faculty orientation. I wish we could scale it up in that way, but we are trying to at the very least, collect the data to show to our administration that it is worth an investment, because it's not cheap, right? It takes a lot of energy, not just money resources, but the expertise that we have hired and we assembled as part of our team. But we know that any expertise that we can bring can be matched by the wealth of our community. And I think that, you know, we're still looking for ways to perpetuate this kind of program. And if any of you guys have any ideas how we do that, please contact me. This QR code will put you in touch with me, and my cell number is in there as well. And you can also connect with me that way. So I'll stop there and see if we can have a broader dialogue.
Oh my God, I'm still shocked. Thank you very much, both of you, for your presentations. And we really appreciate that you share your experience.
Thank you very much for your time today. And thank you for all of you who are still out there in the audience for hanging in there and